Welcome to Who We Remember. I'm Jamie Younger, the founder of StoryKeep and your host for this podcast. First, let me just say how delighted I am that you're joining us for the show. This is a place where we have uncommon conversations about things that matter deeply to most of us. The people we love and the purpose we give to our own lives and legacies. Our mission at StoryKeep is to capitalize on the power of story for profound good in families of wealth. Since 2010, we've partnered with over 100 families worldwide, creating personal films and private podcasts that help a family navigate their shared narrative. Our work is designed to deepen connections. My conversations on this podcast center around two questions. The first, I ask my guests, whose life story from their family would they most want to see documented on film and why? And the second, what are they, as a person and as a professional, hoping to create and leave behind? Today, I'm joined by Kristen Oliveri, a woman who lives at the intersection of story, connection, and the world of family wealth. Kristen started out as a beat reporter at Institutional Investor, turning dense financial topics into human stories. Since then, she's carved out a unique path, building editorial platforms, curating events, and helping leaders express who they are through her consultancy, Wealth Reimagined. Whether she's moderating a room of next-gen family office leaders or helping someone shape their personal brand, Kristen brings heart, insight, and just the right dose of theater kid charisma. She's got a big love of Italian culture, a cellar full of wines, and yeah, she will absolutely get you on the dance floor. Today, she's here to talk about her maternal grandmother, Maura O'Brien Healy, a woman who made an audacious leap. Born on a farm in County Wicklow, Ireland, Maura was in her late 20s and unmarried, already considered a spinster by local standards, when she decided to start over in America. Her aunt sponsored her, and in order to pass the physical to board the ship, Maura had all of her teeth removed and replaced with veneers. It's a brutal and bizarre detail, but one that really speaks to her determination to begin again. Once in Brooklyn, she met a Scottish-American World War II veteran, fell in love, and after 5 years of courtship, married and had 6 children in rapid succession. Kristen's mom was the oldest. Later in life, Maura moved in with Kristen's family, and it was during that time, when Kristen was just 11, that Kristen asked her mother to sit down so that she could interview her. It was for a school project and possibly the beginning of a life's work. This conversation is about immigration, reinvention, and the bold decisions women make to shape their own futures. And it's about the kind of grandmother who shows up not just as a footnote, but as a full, fascinating force in someone's story. So settle in, you're about to hear a remarkable story and meet someone who is authentic, brave, and deeply focused on what matters. This is Who We Remember. Let's dive in. Kristen, I'm delighted to have this opportunity to sit down with you. We've talked a number of times, but this is a really special occasion. So thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Jamie. This has been such an exciting experience for me already.
Yeah, I know we were just talking before starting about all of the things that have happened and talking to your mom and your aunts about your grandmother. To start off, I just want to ask about why did you want to talk on the show about your grandmother, Maura O'Brien Healy? What made you pick her?
I think it was the first person that came to my mind. Everything in my body said grandma. I try not to think too long about things anymore, and really listen to your intuition. But when you asked me that question, overwhelmingly, my body said my grandmother, Grandma Maura. And she is the only grandparent that she lived with us when I was younger. And in those formative years, we were just so close. My middle name is Maura, so I was named after her. There's just this connection she and I have always had. And sometimes I believe I have this intuition and connection to the other side. I've dreamt about her ever since she passed. I feel like she comes to me in dreams. There's always things where she's showing me signs at different points in my life. So there's just this spiritual connection I think she and I have always had. but I didn't think too hard about it. You asked it and it presented itself.
Well, I was really blown away by some of the parts of her story that you shared, that she was born in Ireland and then in her late 20s, if I'm not mistaken, comes to America and later has a whole bunch of kids. So can you sort of talk about, she was practically a spinster almost in, her time in Ireland and how that all occurred for her?
Yeah, and the spinster too, and that word makes me cringe, but that is what she was considered, right? Her story was she was born on a farm in Wicklow, Ireland. So by the way, this is funny. We don't know how many children were in her family. They think it's around 11. There was a couple of deaths, stillbirths, and then I believe one of her brothers died at age 7. So the number still isn't clear of how many she was. But at 14 years old, she moved to Dublin to go work in a feed store, and she got paid room and board, and that was it. And so she left her family at 14 already to go and have this job to obviously pay for things and support her family. And then as she aged, she didn't find anybody. She wasn't married. And she had an aunt in the United States who was a nanny in New York. And at some point at 29, after being labeled a spinster, again, cringeful word, she decides to be brave and move to a new land. So other than her aunt, she knew no one. And she had to go through a physical exam to get on the steamer to come through Ellis Island. And she didn't really pass the physical for her teeth. They pulled all of the teeth in her mouth, all of them.
All of them.
And she received veneers at 29 years old and then made the incredible trek on a steamer from Ireland to the United States through Ellis Island, which is still, I'd have so many questions for her about that if she was alive today. And she was sponsored by her aunt on the Upper West Side. And then she wound up settling in Brooklyn in Park Slope. And she lived there for many years. And she met my grandfather early days when she arrived. And then they courted for 5 years.
This woman was not in a hurry.
This was the 40s.
Incredible. I find that incredible.
It's wild.
For a woman in the 1940s.
And I believe the story was they met at a church dance. They were both Catholic. My grandfather was Scottish, and he had fought in World War II for the United States, funny enough, and jumped ship and didn't go back to Scotland. The story, or at least what my parents, my aunts and uncles share with us, is that my grandfather felt like he didn't have enough money to propose, that he couldn't support her the way he wanted to. And they always said he was very lucky. They lived on 13th Street, or they settled in 13th Street in Brooklyn, and that was his lucky number. And he wound up winning an Irish church sweepstakes, which was enough money to buy a ring. And he proposed to my grandmother. He went back to Ireland to ask her parents for her hand in marriage. So after 5 long years of courtship, she married when she was 35. Which again, in that day, it's wild. People would have written her off at that point. And she knew my grandfather was the one. She always says that she was just waiting, which is incredible too, that patience.
So this paints a picture of a pretty bold woman who had her own mind and her own ideas. Did she feel that way to you when you were young?
She was so introverted and very quiet. And I think my grandfather was this force. He was a very loud, boisterous, charismatic personality. And she was the opposite of that. She was strong and silent. Very much so. That was my impression of her in those early years, that she was the one. A wallflower kind of comes to mind.
Yeah.
I didn't see her as this strong person until I started aging and hearing her story of resiliency and how she even went from all of these living alone at 14 years old in a big city in Ireland and then moving here by herself. So there was obviously this strong resilience. She was just a woman of fewer words. And I think when I saw them together in my early years, he had passed much earlier than she had. I just always saw him as the dominant figure. I didn't see her as this, and again, that was a little bit of the relationships at the time, but she had this softness about her that I think at the time I saw that as weakness, but really she was so strong. And obviously as you age and you come into that, and I was able to see her power behind it. And she was very thoughtful. She didn't do anything without really thinking it through. And she took her time, which is also very powerful, right? I think the concept of rooted, not rushed is something I'm learning now in my age. But she had that in her center. She was like, I'm going to make a decision when I'm good and ready for it. So the personality, I think, or the way I viewed her personality has changed even obviously upon her death, and sort of evaluating her story and how you're not strong to be able to do all those things that she did.
No, absolutely not. Speaking of which, when you were young, you were about, I think, 10 or 11, like typical in the US, children right around fifth grade or so are encouraged to, I think that was probably part of it, encouraged to interview a grandparent. And I'm just curious what your memories are of doing that. And do you remember any of the questions you asked her, or like the setting? Were you in her house?
So she came to live with us right before that. My grandfather had already passed away. They finally sold the family house in Brooklyn, and she came to live with us. And my grandmother loved reading the newspaper. She would always sit at our kitchen table reading the newspaper. And she had a love of stories, and she was always keeping herself very informed. So when this project came up about who you can interview in your family, I thought, well, she's right here. She's at my kitchen table. I don't remember necessarily the questions I asked her, but I vividly remember us sitting down. She had her cup of tea. She drank tea multiple times a day, probably overly caffeinated at all times. And I had my little list of questions. I had a little tape recorder, the one you clicked with the little, you had to stick the little tape in. And I remember futzing around getting it set up, which is like we do now when we join a join a podcast. And I had my questions prepped, and very much uh, little me was kind of like adult me now. And we just had a really beautiful conversation. I definitely asked her about her life and coming to America. And I talked a lot about, if I remember correctly, her love of news. There was this tie-in in current events and news.
Mm.
And we spoke, and I remember being really blown away by that moment, because it just felt like, one, I was connecting with my grandmother, which was beautiful. And I felt like she was opening up in a way that she hadn't when she were having dinner together. She picked me up after school or whatever it was. And then B, something in me was like, I like this. Whatever this is, the fact that I made her feel comfortable, the fact that she's sharing her story with me, the fact that it felt very easy. I was very prepared, but then it felt really easy at the same time. It felt natural. And that was, I swear, it was the moment I was bitten by the journalism bug. And it wasn't until many, many years later, late in high school, that I wound up being the editor of my school newspaper and all of the things, and did theater. And then I wound up deciding to major in journalism. But it really was that moment when I look back, when you say, where were those things? That was that aha moment. It was sitting at the kitchen table with grandma over a cup of tea.
You also shared with me earlier that you would sometimes go to church with her. She was pretty devout, and how you experienced her spirituality, her devotion. Do you have memories of going to church with her, and what do you make of that now?
She was by far the most religious, spiritual person I know. When she lived on 13th Street in Brooklyn, at the end of her block was their church. And she went almost daily up until she couldn't go anymore physically. And when she moved in with us, we went weekly every Sunday with her. Our whole family was rather Catholic. And, the thing that struck me with her, though, was the spirituality, the connectedness. It wasn't like she had to go. I think part of it was ritual and comfort, but there was this community spirituality aspect of it, that if someone wasn't well, she was openly caring for them. She would go light a candle. As I've aged, I have many issues with organized religion and some of the bad things that go along with it. But the great things is this empathetic, compassion that she had for everyone she met. And I've never met someone that said, okay, well, we're going to go down and we're going to light a candle for Mrs. Such and such around the corner because she was just in the hospital. She was constantly thinking of others while she was there.
Mhm.
She was always putting others before herself. And she did that with all of her 6 kids. And then when we came along and her grandchildren, there was just this beautiful compassion that she had. And sometimes I remember challenging her as a kid. I'm like, do we have to go every Sunday? And there was, the routine would kind of drag with me. And I had lots of questions as I was younger. But when I was with her, I always felt very peaceful. And it still is the case if I attend church today, which isn't as regularly as it used to be growing up. But, people go to church for a lot of different reasons. But I've always felt at peace there. And I remember her sharing that with me. She felt very calm and peaceful, but part of like a meditation for her. That's always stuck with me, especially now as my kids age and we think about what kind of spirituality component do we want in our own family. I think of her all the time. And I think of why she was there. And it was oftentimes to help other people.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. You have worked as a journalist. You still do, content work, mostly in the world of, family wealth and women in wealth. Now, kind of putting your journalistic hat on, if your grandmother were still here now in hindsight, what do you think you would want to ask her, knowing what you know now?
She wasn't necessarily the open book that I am, which is wild, but I would definitely start with her parents. I feel like I know nothing about them. And when I was on this journey trying to prep for this call and speaking to my mom and my aunts,
Mm.
they did, but they didn't. They died so early. My mother never met them, any of her grandparents, all four of them. She never met them. They'd all passed by the time she was born. So there's so many questions about how she grew up. Why did she move to a larger city at 14 to support the family? I mean, we could guess, but what was that experience like for her? She lived alone at 14. She lived above the store.
Yeah.
I can't even fathom that. And then making these decisions in her life that she wasn't necessarily vocal about, but the strength it had to have taken to go from these places, leaving home, leaving your family, everything that's familiar, and just being brave enough to start a new life. The isolation she must have felt, I would just be so curious about that. I would absolutely ask her if she was really annoyed that it took my grandfather 5 years to propose. I would be. And then the other thing, especially after I became a mother, realizing she had 6 children back to back. They're almost all Irish twins.
Meaning they were born in the same calendar year.
It's wild. I mean, just 6 pregnancies. So she was just pregnant for, better part of 7 years, just back to back. And how she managed all of that. My grandfather owned a store, a delicatessen in Brooklyn, and he held many jobs after that. But he was always, that was a 24/7. You're at the store, and she had to take care of 6, mostly babies at the same time, which is incredible. And her patience and when I did speak with my aunts and uncles, and I think they always spoke to that, how patient she was, how calm she was. I'd imagine you'd have to be to have 6 kids, period, but even let alone in that time period. So I'd be fascinated to ask her about motherhood, the physical experience of
Yeah.
it, the mental load. She was doing a lot of it on her own. But I will say, and this is something that during our conversations, it came to me too. She had this really interesting collection of women. Like there was a village for her. My aunts, one of her brothers wound up moving over from Ireland, and his wife, they helped raise each other's families. So, she did have the village of women and they were so close and they all looked after each other. And my parents always say that they were like second mothers, and that's very beautiful and fostering those relationships. So I think I'd be curious about that too. And then probably the last question I'd have for her would be a little bit about her life after my grandfather passed, because she was so spiritual. And when he died, she was very vocal on God could take me now. I'm ready. I can go. She wanted to be with her husband. And I remember my mom and her brothers and sisters were always like, Mom, this is your time. And she lived a lot longer after that. And she did have this second act in many ways. She lived with us. She lived with my uncle and my other aunt. And, we took her to a lot of family weddings and she was able to experience these things. And my uncle had children a little later in life and she was there for the 2 of their births. There was this beautiful second act she had. And in many ways, because he was a lot more dominant than her, I think she lived in a way she hadn't before. So I'd be curious to hear about that and how she viewed that time in her
Yeah.
life. Obviously, towards the latter part of her life, but there are really special moments that I think maybe she didn't realize she would have had. But
I'm so intrigued by her era of having come over in the 40s and then, having her first pregnancy when she's about 36, which is, even in this day and age is relatively late, right? I mean, there's a lot of women who are having children in their early 40s, but she was also having children in her early 40s, the last of them. So she was really, ahead of her time in that regard. I too would have questions for her about if she felt different, also in her body's capacity and how that was for her. I'm sure
wasn't it?
she'd have a lot to say if we sat for a while and had the patience to hear her out. Um, I think you have an object of hers, a possession. Can you tell a little bit about it and show it to us? I know some people are listening on audio, but you can sort of describe it.
My grandmother loved pins.
Oh, wow. Yes.
She was a
Yes.
big brooch pin, very much that era, right? She loves scarves, which I feel like I'm coming into now. So when you asked, did I have something from her? Now, I am the oldest grandchild, and my mother is the first of her children. And then we obviously lived with her. I don't have many of her items. She was Irish. She drank a lot of tea, as I mentioned. So she had tea sets and things like that. My two aunts have a lot of some of those items, but there aren't many possessions that I have of her. And this pin, funny enough, was just given to me by my mother recently. And she was looking through her things and things that my grandmother had given her. And she said, I think this was meant for you. So please take this pin. And it's been sitting in my nightstand on my jewelry stand for a while. And I find it, and it was in its original packaging. It looks like maybe it's from the 90s ish, but
Yeah.
this is very representative of something she would have worn.
Yeah.
She loved green. She loved pins. She loved gold. Yeah, this is really special. When I think of it, I could think of her. Like, I could see her wearing it right now. And it's something that isn't all that old. It's not something from her childhood, but it's definitely something that if we were in a store, she would have been like, "That's what I want."
Yeah. Beautiful. Um, I want to turn now and talk about your work. And, we're talking sort of about your grandmother's legacy, but sort of the work that you're doing now and the legacy that you're wanting to create and leave behind. And maybe the threads that you see between the two of you, between your grandma Maura. She loved newspapers and reading, and you went into journalism. So that one seems obvious to me, but I'm curious of your reflections.
The other thing that really came up when I was thinking about this, that's because sometimes when I think about her, I don't think we're similar, other than I look just like her, by the way. We have the same stature. My sister and I have her stature. My mother and my aunts are much taller. I'm 5'1". I look just like her. So in terms of physicalness, I inherited grandma's genes for sure.
Yeah.
But because she was so quiet, a lot of times I thought, oh boy, I'm the opposite of her, right? It wasn't personality wise that I don't necessarily have that. But when I was really thinking about it, my mother brought this up. She goes, your grandmother was the most hospitable woman ever. If family was coming over from Ireland, the UK, if someone was down on their luck in Brooklyn, she took them in. Even with 6 kids, she would find a space. Some of her brothers and sisters lived with her before they assimilated into the US. A lot of her brother's kids, my aunts and uncles, and then later on cousins who were all very close on that side of the family came to stay with her. They come from Ireland and they're in college or whatever it was. And she had this real sense of hospitality and family and this connectedness that your family will find a way. And she always wanted to make people feel at home. And that's definitely a thread that I've had ever since I was younger. Even when I was in my early 20s and I lived alone or what have you, I would always have people at my house. We would always be eating, or I'd be, hosting them. And some of the on the food side is my Italian side, but there was this connectivity of come to my home, be here with me. And the other piece was I've traveled a lot over the years for work, very lucky and fortunate. I've been all over the US and Europe. And a lot of times I was in big major cities that either friends or family or former colleagues lived in. And I don't know if this is a good or bad thing. I have this compulsive nature to go see them. If I'm in Colorado, I see my cousin Stephen on my Irish side. If I'm in London, I call up all the family that's in London, without a doubt, my cousin Christine and her son. I always do this. I was just in Chicago and I saw a really dear friend. So, and this spirit of hospitality is definitely something my mother and father don't necessarily do that. I definitely get it from grandma. When I think about legacy in many levels, right? Because you could look at it in many levels. I always come back to, how do you make people feel? And I think people feel remembered and seen with me, or I hope that they do. And that felt very evident to me when my husband and I got married in Italy 7 years ago. We invited a lot of people and we said, hey, don't worry about if you can't fly over or what have you. We'll have a little party back in New York. And there were so many people that showed up from all parts of our lives. And a lot of my family in the UK came, and a lot of friends that I had visited over the years and made that extra time to see them for dinner, people that you wouldn't have thought would have traveled for you. And I think that connectivity of family, hospitality, and making people feel special is something I absolutely learned from her. And I hope that's part of my legacy, and I hope my kids are seeing that I do that, um, too. So that's a big piece.
Yeah, yeah. And then on the professional front, you have launched your own consultancy, Wealth Reimagined, and it's sort of combining several things, sort of event curation and journalism and helping people sort of with branded content. And I'm wondering sort of what the thread is there for you between those pieces of work and how they're sort of part of the legacy that you are building yourself.
Sure. I always say Wealth Reimagined is three things. If it's the easiest to distill, it's content, it's consulting services, and it's travel. And I think all those things we just talked about is part of that. On the content side, it's storytelling. And that's at my core. I love hearing and helping people share their stories. And that started with grandma, full stop. The beauty of running your own business and being an entrepreneur is, this is the first time in my life I've had the ability to choose the stories I get to tell. And that feels really freeing after 20 years of covering a space where, and these are the things I really care about, but I got to go report on all this other stuff. And it feels really wonderful and connected to me personally to come back and say, well, these are the stories I want to share. If it's women in wealth, if it's family dynamics, if it's on the luxury lifestyle travel side, these are things that I feel connected to. And I really love doing interview work, right? Sitting down with people in a way that feels real, whether it's in the written word or it's in some sort of visual context, but helping people share their stories and sort of pushing them to be a little bit more authentic. And you do such a great job of this. But when you're covering folks that are in that financial mindset, sometimes they say, well, this is my job and this is what I do. And I'm like, but who are you? Can we bring a little bit of, yeah, can we bring like your motivation and your passion to those stories?
And why?
That's a really amazing piece of it. On the consulting side, I take on clients and I do a little bit of everything. I help them tell their stories. I brand content, and I really provide insights into the family office space, which is quite elusive. And I think it's one of those, if you know, you know, and I've spent 20 years knowing. And then the other piece is this, my passion for travel. I've written about it for forever. I've been many places, not enough. So many more to take off. But I'm so obsessed with this Anthony Bourdain quote, and I put it on my website. Travel is not a reward for working. It's experience for living. I may be misquoting that somehow. Oh, it's a reward for living, but meaning that, we need to travel to understand other people and other cultures and have this humanity. And I've always felt that way. And there's a lot of connectedness to how I think my grandmother felt, right? She was brave enough to move somewhere else that she'd never seen or knew anything about. But having that, fearlessness of trying something new. So travel's always been a big component for me. And I'm just so proud when I really think about it, probably how much she had to sacrifice for her family to support 6 children, to raise 3 daughters. And then for my mother to raise me and my sister, that I know that all of those sacrifices, well, very emotional, is allowing me to be in the United States and to launch my own business and it's because of her.
Yeah, truly. We talked a little bit earlier about, what you would wanna talk to her about and stories and everything. But I'm wondering what you would want to maybe not ask her, but what you would sort of wanna tell her now about who you've become and what you're trying to do. Like, if you were speaking to her as opposed to a prospect or someone in the space, but if she was still alive and you were sort of describing to her what you're up to and why you're doing it and why you're passionate about it. How do you think you would explain it to her?
That's a great question. I think wealth management is something I sort of fell into. I didn't necessarily seek to do it. And I've had questions over the years where people ask me, well, do you feel like it's slightly vapid covering the rich and how they invest and how they make more money and what have you? And I think the thing that I keep coming back to, which I would love to share with her, is the good that private capital does on so many levels. And that there are these great philanthropic stories and people that, or these incredible stories of family businesses that started from nothing. People with grit and determination, like herself, have built these incredible legacies, family businesses, have amassed great wealth and are doing great things with them. So I think those are the stories I love sharing. And that's at the core of what I do. And the other thing that I feel extremely passionate about is amplifying women's voices. I think you do as well. And that's really at my core. And even just sharing the story before about my grandmother and her close-knit group of friends, like 4 women raised these how many children? 25 kids together, right? And they uplifted each other, and they were working and amplifying each other in ways that may not seem like today was a lot, but back then it was. And they were there for each other at every moment, and they had each other's backs. And I try to do that in my personal life, obviously, but I also try to do that professionally. I try to look at people that say, okay, who's not getting enough press attention, or who needs to be at this panel discussion because they don't get enough airtime. And the older gentlemen aren't moving out of the way just yet. So maybe I can help them and amplify their voice. So that's something that I think I'd really want to share with her now. And hopefully she knows that, I work for 2 reasons. Obviously to sustain my family and to provide for them. And I'm very proud that I can do that as equally as my husband, without a doubt. But I also do it for me. This is who I am. It's what I love. I think some people have different views on why you work, but I feel very connected to the work that I do. If I didn't, I wouldn't be in this space for 20 years. And the people I've met along the way are incredible and true Renaissance people. And it just always brings me back to why I've, now built my own business, which is hopefully my future career legacy. So I think I'd love to share that with her. I would have loved for her to meet my husband. They would have just been 2 peas in a pod. Yeah, and I think she'd be really proud of my mom and all that she's accomplished in her life. But
And you. Yeah. Well, I have to say, I absolutely loved learning about your grandmother and picturing her and envisioning this, also myself having been someone who went
mhm.
the other direction, went from the United States to Europe. And I have some inkling of, a little bit of what that journey was like for her and the sacrifices that she made. I dare say that hers were a more dramatic than mine, given the time that she did it in. But what an incredible example. And I'm so glad that you honored her and shared her with me and with everyone who's listening. I just want to close this out together by bringing us back to the sort of the concept of if you had had the chance to capture her on film. If you had
Yeah.
like a visual clip, like a video clip of her of 30 seconds, a minute of her doing whatever, what would be happening in that scene?
I always remember her at our dining room table. She loved, this is very cliche and very Irish of her. She loved Irish soda bread, any sort of sweet thing. She loved her tea. That was a ritual, which I love. And I just remember sitting and eating, and she was a very thoughtful, deliberate eater. She did not feel rushed. She took her time, which is what they tell us all that we should be doing when we eat. But I think of her a lot because she really, this rooted, not rushed phrase reminds me of her. So if I had to think back, I just remember her probably in her late 70s, early 80s, white hair, petite, wearing her pins at the table, having her drink a cup of tea and me probably yammering on about school things. And she was always just so patient and so ready, willing to listen. And I think that's such a strength. And hopefully I've inherited that as a good listener. But those moments, I think, are when just me and her at the kitchen table, dining room table, what have you. That would be my real memory of her.
Kristen, it's always so nice to be with you and talk.
Thank you. You too.
But this one in particular is really special. So thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for helping me think about all of these things. It's been really, truthfully, a moving spiritual moment for me. So thank you, Jamie.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Who We Remember. If you enjoyed this, I invite you to subscribe. When you subscribe, a new episode will pop up automatically in your favorite listening platform every 2 weeks. You can see some great photos related to today's story, as well as find out more about our guests and their work. Just go to storykeep.com/podcast. Who We Remember is a production of StoryKeep. StoryKeep works with exceptional individuals and families to document their life stories and histories through films and private podcasts. You can learn more about our services at storykeep.com.